The night was bitterly cold, the kind that seeped into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. Lucas Ford knew this kind of night well, the kind where people disappeared, where the world forgot about you if you let it. He pulled his jacket tighter as he locked up his garage, already dreading the long walk back to his tiny trailer. Just another night, just another struggle. But then he saw her. A woman sat curled up against the brick wall of an alley, her arms wrapped around herself, shivering. She was too well-spoken, too alert, too different from the usual faces he saw in this part of town. She wasn't just another homeless drifter, and when she lifted her head, locking those sharp blue eyes onto his, Lucas felt something shift in his gut, a warning, or maybe an invitation to trouble. He could walk away, or he could do something that might just change both of their lives forever. If you think this is just another love story, think again. This is about trust, betrayal, and the kind of choices that can rewrite a person's destiny. So, if you're ready for a ride filled with twists, suspense, and a love story unlike any other, make sure to subscribe. And stick around, you won't want to miss what happens next. Hit that subscribe button, and let's dive into this unforgettable journey. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of gasoline and rust from the small auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. Inside, Lucas Ford wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag, his fingers aching from a full day of back-to-back repairs. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting a dim glow over the cluttered workspace. His shift had ended an hour ago, but a last-minute customer had rolled in with a busted radiator, and Lucas, being the man he was, couldn't turn them away. He checked his watch. 9:47 p.m. Too late to cook a proper meal, not that he had much. In his fridge, anyway. The only thing waiting for him at home was a half-eaten sandwich from the gas station down the road. He sighed, rolling his shoulders, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle deep into his bones. As he stepped outside, the winter chill cut through his thin jacket. The streets were quiet, the town's shops long closed, their windows darkened. Lucas tucked his hands into his pockets and started his walk home. His truck had broken down last week, ironic for a mechanic, but he hadn't had the time or the extra cash to fix it yet. The town of Brookhaven wasn't big, but it was home. A once thriving industrial town, now struggling with economic decline. Factories had shut down, businesses had closed, and the once busy streets were now filled with empty storefronts and people barely scraping by. Lucas knew that feeling all too well. He had grown up here, spent his whole life here, watching the place slowly crumble like an old, forgotten relic. As he turned the corner onto Main Street, he spotted something, or rather someone, sitting on the cold pavement near an alleyway. A woman, bundled up in a tattered coat, hugging her knees to her chest. Her hair was tangled, falling in waves around her pale face. From a distance, she looked like any other homeless person, one of many, who had fallen through the cracks of society. Lucas wasn't one to pry, but something about her gave him pause. Maybe it was the way she sat, upright, almost dignified, rather than slumped in despair like so many others he'd seen. Maybe it was the way she seemed to be trying to make herself invisible, despite the fact that she was already unseen by most people passing by. He hesitated. He had barely enough for himself, and this town wasn't known for its generosity. Most folks kept their heads down, pretending not to see the growing number of homeless on the streets. Lucas had done them, same more times than he cared to admit, but tonight felt different. He took a step forward, then another. The woman must have heard his footsteps because she lifted her head slightly. Her eyes met his, blue, sharp, and piercing. Not the dull, lifeless stare of someone long lost to the streets. No, these eyes held intelligence, awareness. Lucas cleared his throat. "Cold night," he said, breaking the silence. She didn't reply, just studied him as if trying to decide whether he was a threat. He sighed, reaching into his bag and pulling out the sandwich he'd been saving for dinner. It wasn't much, Just turkey and cheese on dry bread, but it was all he had. He held it out. "Here," he said, "it's not fancy, but it's better than nothing." The woman's gaze flickered between him and the sandwich. For a moment, he thought she would refuse. Then, slowly, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his as she took it. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than he expected. Refined. It didn't match the ragged coat she wore. Lucas shrugged. "No big deal." He hesitated before adding, "You got a place to stay?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Not really." Lucas wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't some knight in shining armor. He could barely keep himself afloat, let alone rescue someone else. But still, something about the way she sat there, proud yet vulnerable, made it impossible for him to just walk away. "There's an old storage room at my shop," he said finally. "It's not much. No heat, just a cot and some blankets. But it's better than freezing out here." The woman stilled, staring at him like he had just offered her the keys to a mansion. "You don't even know me," she said slowly. Lucas shrugged again. "Don't have to." There was a long pause. Then, for the first time, she smiled, just a little, not enough to be noticeable to most people, but enough for Lucas to see. "Okay," she whispered. Lucas exhaled, only now realizing he'd been holding his breath. "All right, come on then." He turned and started walking back toward the garage. He didn't check to see if she followed, but he heard the soft scuff of her shoes against the pavement. As they walked, Lucas glanced sideways at her. She didn't look like the other homeless people in town. There was something different about her, not just in her speech, but in the way she carried herself. Who was she? He didn't know it yet, but this single act of kindness, a meal, a warm place to sleep, would change both their lives forever. The garage sat at the edge of town, just past a row of shuttered storefronts and forgotten businesses. The large metal doors were pulled shut for the night, but Lucas still had his key. The sign above the entrance, Ford Auto Repair, had once belonged to his father before the old man passed and left him the shop, along with a mountain of debt that he was still trying to climb out of. As they approached, Lucas glanced back at the woman following him. She hadn't spoken much on the walk over, but she didn't seem afraid. That was unusual. Most women in her situation would have hesitated before following a strange man into an empty building at night. But she carried herself with an almost unnatural confidence, as if she were the one in control of the situation. Lucas unlocked the door and stepped inside, flipping on the lights. The garage was exactly what one would expect. Grease-stained floors, rusted toolboxes, and the lingering scent of oil and gasoline. It wasn't much, but it was his. He led her toward a small back room, past the workbenches and car lifts. It wasn't really a room, more of a storage space, with a cot pushed against the wall. A spare blanket sat folded at the foot of the bed, and there was a small space heater in the corner, though Lucas wasn't sure if it still worked. "It's not the Ritz, but it's warm," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "You can crash here for the night." The woman stepped inside cautiously, her gaze sweeping over the space, as if taking mental notes. She didn't seem disappointed. If anything, she looked curious. "You live here?" she asked finally. Lucas snorted. "No. I've got a trailer a few blocks away. But some nights, I end up crashing here when I work late." She nodded, then turned back to him. "Why are you doing this?" Lucas frowned. "What do you mean?" She crossed her arms. "You don't know me. I could rob you blind while you sleep." Lucas let out a dry chuckle. "Lady, you don't look like someone who'd steal a toolbox and pawn it for $50. She didn't laugh. Instead, she studied him, as if trying to figure him out. Lucas didn't like being analyzed. He wasn't some puzzle to be solved. He sighed. "Look, I don't have some grand reason for helping you. It's just—" He hesitated, then shrugged. "You looked like you needed a break." For a long moment she didn't respond. Then, to his surprise, she offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated just for a second. Then, Victoria. Lucas narrowed his eyes slightly. It was a regal name, the kind you didn't hear often. Victoria what? Just Victoria. He could tell she was lying, but he let it slide. All right, just Victoria. Make yourself at home. He turned toward the door, but paused. If you need anything, just holler. Victoria didn't answer, but as he stepped out and shut the door behind him, he could feel her eyes lingering on him. Lucas lay in his trailer later that night, staring at the ceiling. He should have been asleep by now. He had another long shift at the garage tomorrow, but his mind kept circling back to Victoria. Something about her didn't add up. Her clothes were dirty but not old. Her hands, though red from the cold, weren't rough or calloused, not the hands of someone who had been homeless for a long time. And then there was the way she spoke, polished, careful, deliberate, not like someone who had spent years struggling on the streets. Who was she? Lucas sighed, forcing himself to roll over. It didn't matter. She was just a woman down on her luck, like so many others. And tomorrow she'd probably be gone. That thought shouldn't have bothered him, but for some reason it did. Lucas showed up at the shop early, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He had half expected Victoria to be gone, but when he pushed open the storage room door, he found her exactly where he left her, sitting on the cot, fully awake. She was staring at the ground, lost in thought. "Didn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "I haven't slept well in a long time." Lucas didn't pry. He knew what it was like to lie awake at night, mind racing with things you couldn't fix. Instead, he tossed a bag onto the cot next to her. "Breakfast." She looked down, surprised. Inside was a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich wrapped in foil, still warm. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Gas station down the street." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Gas station food?" Lucas smirked. "Hey, don't knock it till you try it." She hesitated, then unwrapped the sandwich and took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly. Lucas chuckled. "Told you?" For the first time since they met, Victoria looked at him without suspicion. Something shifted between them. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was something. The day passed in a blur of work. Lucas spent most of it under the hood of an old Chevy, cursing at rusted bolts and malfunctioning engines. Victoria stayed in the back room, out of the way, but she watched everything, quiet, observant. By late afternoon, Lucas took a break, wiping the sweat from his brow. Victoria stepped out from the storage room, looking more rested than she had. "Last night, you work hard," she noted. Lucas gave a tired grin. "Somebody's got to keep this town moving." Victoria nodded slowly. Then, out of nowhere, "I used to run a business." Lucas stilled. That was the first real thing she'd told him about herself. "Yeah," he said casually. "What kind of business?" Victoria hesitated. Then instead of answering, she asked, "Why did you become a mechanic?" Lucas blinked. He wasn't expecting that. He thought about his answer for a moment. "Because my old man was one." He gestured toward the faded Ford Auto Repair sign. This was his shop. When he passed, it became mine. Victoria studied him, as if turning those words over in her mind. Then she asked, "Was that what you wanted?" Lucas had never really considered that before. Before he could answer, the garage door swung open with a loud bang. A black Mercedes-Benz pulled up outside. Lucas didn't recognize the car, but when he turned to Victoria, her face had gone pale, and that was the moment he realized whoever she was running from had just found her. The black Mercedes-Benz idled just outside the garage, its polished exterior gleaming under the afternoon sun. It was a car that didn't belong in Brookhaven. Too sleek, too expensive, too out of place in a town where most people struggled to keep their trucks running. Lucas wiped his hands on a rag, his eyes narrowing as the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out, dressed in a dark, tailored suit. Everything about him screamed money. He was in his late 40s with neatly combed hair and an expression that radiated authority. Lucas didn't need to look at Victoria to know something was wrong. He could feel the tension radiating from her. She had gone completely still. The man's gaze swept the garage before landing on Lucas. He didn't acknowledge him at first, just adjusted his cufflinks as if stepping into a place like this was beneath him. Then he spoke. "I'm looking for someone." Lucas kept his expression neutral. "That's so." The man took a slow step forward. "A woman, dark hair, about this tall." He held up a hand to indicate Victoria's height. "She's been missing." Lucas didn't flinch. He glanced at Victoria, who was standing just out of the man's line of sight, partially obscured behind a tool cabinet. He could tell she was debating whether to step forward or run. The man exhaled sharply, clearly impatient. "Look, I don't have time for games. If you've seen her, just tell me." Lucas crossed his arms, keeping his stance casual. "I see a lot of people. Hard to say." The man's jaw tightened. Lucas had dealt with guys like this before. Men who thought their money gave them the right to control everything and everyone. Around them. The man finally turned his head slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of Victoria. His entire posture stiffened. Victoria. Lucas felt her shift beside him. Her fingers clenched into fists at her sides. There was a moment of silence before she finally stepped forward, her chin lifted in defiance. She wasn't afraid, or at least she didn't show it. "Hello, Richard." Lucas's stomach tightened, so they knew each other. The man, Richard, tilted his head. "You've had your fun, but it's time to come home." Lucas glanced at Victoria. "Home?" She didn't react. She didn't move. She just stared at Richard like he was a ghost from her past she had long hoped to forget. "You don't get to decide that," she said finally. Richard let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. You're needed." Lucas felt his patience wearing thin. He didn't like the way this guy talked to her, like she was some runaway pet instead of a person. She said no. Lucas interjected, his voice calm but firm. Richard turned his attention to him for the first time, really looking at him. His expression shifted from annoyance to something colder, calculating. "And you are?" Lucas shrugged. "Just a guy with a wrench." Richard's lips curved into a smirk, as if dismissing him entirely. "Do you have any idea who she is?" Lucas didn't blink. "Nope, and I don't really care." That was a lie. Of course he cared. He wanted answers just as much as Richard did. Richard sighed, rubbing his temple as if this was all just an inconvenience. "Listen, mechanic, I don't have time for this. I just need Victoria to come with me so we can handle this like adults." Victoria's voice cut through the air like a blade. "We're done handling things your way." Richard's smirk faded. For a brief moment something dark flickered behind his eyes. Lucas caught it. A flash of control, possessiveness, whatever. It wasn't just about business. Victoria turned to Lucas suddenly. "Do you have a car I can borrow?" He hesitated. She wanted to run. Richard stiffened. "You're not running." Victoria didn't even look at him. Lucas exhaled. Sharply, running a hand through his hair. He didn't know the whole story, but he knew enough to trust his gut, and his gut told him Victoria wasn't safe with this man. "Yeah," he said finally. "Keys are on the counter." Victoria didn't waste a second. She snatched them up and headed for the garage's back exit. Richard's face twisted in frustration. "You're making a mistake, Victoria." She didn't respond. Then he turned to Lucas, and for the first time his voice lowered into something dangerous. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." Lucas tilted his head, unimpressed. "Guess I'll find out." Richard exhaled slowly, then stepped back toward his car. His threat didn't need words. It was already there in his eyes. He got into the Mercedes and drove off without another word. Lucas turned toward the back exit, where Victoria had disappeared. He had a feeling his life had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. Lucas stood in the empty garage, the scent of motor oil lingering in the air. The sound of Richard's Mercedes-Benz had long since faded, but the tension remained, coiling in his chest like a spring wound too tight. Victoria was gone. She had taken the keys to his old Ford pickup and vanished through the back exit, peeling out onto the open road like a ghost disappearing into the night. Lucas hadn't stopped her. He didn't know if that was the right call or the dumbest thing he'd ever done. His gut told him one thing: Richard wasn't done. The man carried himself like someone who always got what he wanted, and if Victoria was what he wanted, then this wasn't over. Lucas turned back toward the garage, rubbing a hand over his jaw. There was nothing he could do now. She made her choice. Except a distant rumbling echoed down the street. Lucas stepped outside, frowning. The sound was familiar, but off. It wasn't the steady hum of a well-tuned engine. It was the stuttering cough of a car struggling to breathe. And then he saw it. His old Ford pickup, the same one Victoria had driven off in less than 10 minutes ago, was now rolling back toward the garage at a snail's pace, making a horrific sputtering noise. Lucas crossed his arms. "You've got to be kidding me." The truck jerked to a stop just a few feet away, steam hissing from under the hood. The driver's side door creaked open, and Victoria stepped out, looking more frustrated than embarrassed. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "You steal my truck and it breaks down on you. That's karma, lady." Victoria exhaled sharply, kicking at the dirt. "It wasn't exactly theft. You gave me the keys. I didn't expect you to take off like a damn bank robber." She shot him a look, then glanced back at the truck. "Is it dead?" Lucas smirked. "Nah, just wounded. I've been meaning to fix the radiator, but—" He gestured at himself. "Busy keeping my life together." Victoria let out a slow breath, her shoulders sagging. Lucas watched her carefully. She looked exhausted, not just physically but in a way that went deeper, settling into her bones. Finally, she muttered, "Well, this is humiliating." Lucas chuckled. "It's entertaining. There's a difference." She shot him a glare, but there was no real heat behind it. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, then jerked his head toward the garage. "Come on. Let's get that truck back inside before Richard and his goons decide to come back." Victoria hesitated for only a second before nodding. Lucas slid into the driver's seat, turned the ignition, and coaxed the old engine to life just long enough to limp it inside. When the garage doors shut behind them, he turned to face her. "All right," he said, arms crossed. "You want to tell me what the hell is going on?" Victoria sat on the hood of the truck, fingers laced together, staring at the stained concrete floor. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked unsure of herself. Lucas waited. He wasn't going to press her, but he wasn't going to let this slide either. Finally, she exhaled. "You were right. I'm not just some random homeless woman." Lucas gave her a flat look. "Shocker," she rolled her eyes. "I left my life behind, walked away from everything." Lucas leaned against the workbench, watching her carefully. "Why?" Victoria hesitated. Then, "Because I couldn't trust anyone anymore." Lucas frowned. She continued, her voice quieter now. "Richard isn't just some businessman. He was my father's right-hand man. When my dad died last year, I inherited everything." She let out a humorless laugh. "Billions of dollars, a company, a legacy I never asked for." Lucas whistled. "And Richard wanted control." Her jaw tightened. "He spent months trying to push me into a corner, convincing the board that I wasn't fit to run the company. I was getting close to proving he was manipulating assets behind my back. And then—" She swallowed. "Then things started happening." Lucas's stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" Victoria looked up at him, and for the first time there was fear in her eyes. "My apartment was broken into. My assistant quit without explanation. I started getting messages, anonymous threats." She shook her head. I couldn't trust anyone, not even the people I thought were on my side. Lucas let out a low breath. So you ran? Victoria nodded. I left my phone, my cards, everything. I wanted to see if there was anyone out there who... She stopped herself, looking almost embarrassed. Lucas tilted his head. Who what? She hesitated before saying who would help me just because it was the right thing to do. Lucas blinked. She glanced away quickly. It's stupid. Forget I said anything. Lucas shook his head. It's not stupid, because now he understood. Victoria Langford had lived in a world where everything came with a price. Every relationship, every favor. It had always been transactional. She had never known what it was like to be helped without expectation. Lucas exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Okay, Victoria blinked at him. Okay, yeah, he shrugged. You need help, I'm here. She stared at him as if trying to find the catch. Why? Lucas smirked. Guess I want to see how this plays out. For the first time, Victoria smiled. A real one. Not the forced, guarded kind he'd seen before, but before the moment could settle, a sharp knock sounded at the garage door. Lucas and Victoria froze. Another knock. Louder this time. Lucas Ford, a deep voice called. Lucas exchanged a look with Victoria. That wasn't Richard. He grabbed a wrench off the workbench, just in case, and moved toward the door. Victoria slid off the truck, her body tensed. Lucas cracked the door open, just enough to see who was outside. Two men in suits. Not cops, not locals. Definitely trouble. One of them held up a badge, FBI. Lucas blinked. What the hell? The agent gave him a steady look. We need to talk about Victoria Langford. Lucas slowly turned his head toward Victoria. Her face had gone pale, and that was the moment he realized Richard wasn't the only one looking for her. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Lucas stood frozen, his fingers gripping the door handle, while Victoria's breath hitched behind him. FBI. The agent standing in front of him had a sharp, unreadable expression. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a neatly pressed suit that looked too expensive for a place like Brookhaven. The second agent, slightly shorter, but just as imposing, stood at his side, eyes scanning the garage as if expecting trouble. Lucas's heart drummed against his ribs. He had seen law enforcement around town before, small-town cops, state troopers, maybe a tax collector once or twice, but never the feds. He kept his face neutral. You got the wrong guy. The taller agent didn't. Blink. You are Lucas Ford, correct? Lucas hesitated. Lying to the FBI seemed like a bad idea. Yeah. The agent nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. We're looking for Victoria Langford. At that moment, Lucas felt Victoria stiffen behind him. She didn't run, didn't make a sound, but he could feel her body tense, her breath shallow. Lucas kept his stance relaxed, leaning against the doorframe. Never heard of her. The shorter agent, the one who had been silent until now, let out a slow sigh. He pulled something from his pocket and unfolded it, a printed photograph. It was Victoria. Her hair was tidier, her clothes polished, but there was no mistaking the sharp blue eyes staring back at him from the page. The headline above the photo made his stomach drop. Heiress Victoria Langford, missing amid corporate scandal. Missing. Lucas barely stopped his expression from shifting. He turned his gaze back to the agents, playing dumb. What's this got to do with me? The taller agent spoke again, his tone level. We traced a tip that she was seen near your garage. If you have any information about her whereabouts, now would be the time to share it. Lucas exhaled slowly. He could feel Victoria's eyes boring into his back. They were giving him an out. If he pointed them to her, if he gave her up right now, he could wash his hands of this whole mess. He thought about it for a second, and then he said, Haven't seen her. There was a beat of silence. The agent studied him. Lucas stared back. Finally, the taller one nodded. "All right. If you do, here's my card." He slipped a business card onto the workbench beside the door. "Call us." Lucas took it without looking at it. The agents exchanged a glance, then turned and walked away, disappearing into their black SUV parked just down the street. Lucas waited until they drove off before shutting the door and locking it. He turned. Around, Victoria was standing there, arms wrapped around herself. Her face was unreadable, but her fingers trembled slightly. "You didn't have to do that." Lucas exhaled sharply. "Yeah, well, I did." For a while, neither of them spoke. Lucas sat on the workbench, arms crossed. Victoria leaned against the truck, her fingers tracing the outline of a rusted dent. "You lied to the FBI," she said finally. Lucas shrugged. "Not the first time I've made a dumb decision." Victoria let out a breathy laugh. It wasn't humor, it was disbelief. "Why?" she asked. Lucas rubbed a hand over his face. "Why? Because something about Richard rubbed him the wrong way." "Because Victoria wasn't acting like some fraud or fugitive. She was scared, because when she told him she couldn't trust anyone, she meant it." Finally, he sighed. "I don't like being lied to, and I don't trust rich guys who show up in fancy cars, thinking they own the world." Victoria blinked. "That's it?" "That's it." She shook her head, looking down. "You don't even know me," Lucas smirked. "That's what you said last night. Didn't stop me then either." She stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in her gaze, then quietly, "Thank you." Lucas exhaled. He wasn't sure if "thank you" was enough for what he'd just done, but he let it slide for now. After a while, Lucas leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "All right. Now tell me what I'm actually dealing with." "Here." Victoria hesitated. Lucas narrowed his eyes. "You don't get to hold back anymore. Not after I just turned away the damn FBI." She sighed. "Okay." She sat down across from him. "Richard wants control of the company." Lucas waited. She had already told him that much. Victoria continued. "He was working behind the scenes, trying to get the board to force me out. But before that could happen, I found something." Lucas tilted his head. "Something?" "Evidence." Now she had his full attention. Victoria swallowed. "There were transactions. Money moving where it shouldn't have been. Millions of dollars siphoned out of the company into private accounts. I confronted Richard about it, and the next day..." She trailed off. Lucas's stomach tightened. "What happened?" She met his gaze. "The next day, I was in a car accident." Lucas stiffened. "An accident," Victoria nodded. "At least, that's what they called it. But the brakes on my car failed, and the only people who had access to that car..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Lucas let out a slow breath. "So you ran." Victoria nodded. "I thought if I disappeared I could figure out a way to come back with proof. But I underestimated Richard." Lucas exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "This was a mess, a dangerous one, but there was no turning back now." "All right," he said finally. "Then we figure out what to do next." Victoria blinked at him. "We?" Lucas smirked. "Well, you did steal my truck. Seems like I'm involved whether I like it or not." Victoria let out a small, breathy laugh. For the first time since she walked into his life, Lucas saw something else in her eyes, hope. But before they could say anything else, the garage phone rang. Lucas frowned. Nobody called this number. He stood, walking over to the desk, and picked up the receiver. Ford Auto. A pause. Then a voice, smooth and familiar. "You made the wrong choice, Lucas." Lucas's blood ran cold. "Richard." Before he could respond, the line went dead. The click of the dead phone line echoed in Lucas's ear, followed by a silence so heavy it seemed to press against his chest. His grip tightened around the receiver, jaw clenching, as Richard's last words lingered in his mind. "You made the wrong choice, Lucas." He slowly set the phone down, inhaling deeply through his nose. He could feel Victoria's eyes on him, sharp and expectant, but she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Lucas turned to face her, his voice calm but firm. "We need to go." Victoria's expression flickered, but she nodded. No questions, no hesitation. She trusted him. Lucas moved quickly, grabbing his jacket from the workbench and stuffing a few tools into a bag. His mind was already working through the possibilities. Richard had gotten his number. That meant he knew where to find him. That meant Richard had eyes in this town, which meant they had no time left. Packing up, getting out. "Truck's busted," Victoria reminded him as she grabbed a spare hoodie from the back of the garage. Lucas cursed under his breath. She was right. He hadn't fixed the radiator yet, and the damn thing wouldn't last more than 5 miles before overheating. That left him one option. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his keyring and tossing a set of keys to Victoria. She caught them. "Midair. What's this?" she asked. "A car that actually runs." Victoria glanced down at the keys, then back up at him, brows furrowing. "I thought your truck was all you had." Lucas let out a short, dry chuckle as he walked toward the garage's side door. "I never said that." He led her outside to the alley behind the shop, where a 1987 Dodge Charger sat tucked beneath a tarp. The car was old, but Lucas had kept it in pristine condition. It was the only thing he owned that wasn't falling apart, his father's project car, the one they had worked on together when Lucas was a teenager. Victoria's eyes widened slightly. "This is yours?" Lucas nodded, pulling the top off. With one swift motion, "Yeah, but for now, it's ours." Victoria hesitated only a second before she opened the passenger door and climbed in. Lucas slid into the driver's seat and turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. Smooth and strong, Lucas let out a breath. Good. At least one thing was still working. He threw the car into reverse, backing out onto the street. He had no plan, no destination, just one goal: get the hell out of Brookhaven, the first move. The Charger sped down the empty highway, the town shrinking in the rearview mirror. Lucas kept one hand on the wheel, the other tapping against the gear shift, his mind racing. They needed a plan. Victoria broke the silence first. "Where are we going?" Lucas exhaled. "Somewhere Richard won't find us." Victoria studied him. "You got a place in mind?" Lucas's jaw tightened. He had one idea. "My uncle has a cabin in Arkansas. Middle of nowhere, no internet, no phone line. We can figure things out from there." Victoria nodded slowly. "How far?" 6, maybe 7 hours if we don't stop." Victoria leaned back against the seat, staring out the window. She was quiet, but Lucas could tell her mind was running as fast as the car. Finally, she spoke. "You don't have to do this." Lucas let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, I do." Victoria turned to him. "Why?" Lucas gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go." But he didn't say that. Instead, he just shook his head. "You need help, and I'm already in this mess." Victoria studied him for a long moment before nodding, as if accepting his answer. Then she stiffened. Lucas noticed it instantly. Her posture changed, her breathing shallowed. "What?" he asked. Victoria's voice was tense. "We're being followed." Lucas didn't question her. He knew better than to assume she was paranoid. He checked the rearview mirror, and his stomach dropped. A black SUV, maybe 20 yards back, tinted windows, no headlights, Richard's men. Lucas cursed under his breath. Victoria's fingers curled into fists. "How the hell did they find us this fast?" Lucas didn't answer, because he already knew. Richard hadn't just called to threaten him. He had called to stall him, to keep him in place long enough for his people to get into position. Lucas gritted his teeth. Damn it. The chase. The SUV suddenly lurched forward, closing the distance. Hold on, Lucas muttered. Victoria barely had time to react before he slammed his foot on the gas. The Charger lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement. The speedometer ticked past 70, 80, 90 mph. The SUV kept up. Lucas gripped the wheel, calculating his next move. He knew these roads. Richard's men didn't. That gave him one advantage. He took a hard right, tires kicking up dust as they skidded onto a narrow service road. The SUV followed. "They're not backing off," Victoria muttered, eyes darting. Toward the side mirror. Lucas clenched his jaw. No, they wouldn't. The road ahead was tight, winding between stretches of farmland and empty fields. If he could lose them in the trees, bang! The sound of a gunshot cracked through the night. Victoria flinched. "They're shooting at us!" Lucas didn't hesitate. He jerked the wheel hard to the left, sending the Charger off-road, kicking up gravel and dirt. The car rattled violently, but Lucas kept control. The SUV tried to follow, but it was too big, too slow. The moment it veered off the pavement, its tires sank into the loose dirt. Lucas gunned it, the Charger shooting forward like a bullet. Victoria twisted in her seat, eyes locked on the SUV. It was stuck. They had lost them. Lucas didn't. Slow down. Not until they were miles away, the SUV just a distant memory in the darkness. Finally he exhaled, easing off the gas. The silence in the car was deafening. Victoria turned to him, breathing hard. "What the hell just happened?" Lucas let out a low, shaky laugh. "We just got hunted, that's what." Victoria swallowed hard. "This is real, isn't it?" Lucas met her gaze. "Yeah." He gripped the wheel tighter. "And it's only getting started." The Charger sped down the deserted highway, its tires humming against the asphalt. Lucas kept one hand firm on the wheel, the other resting tensely near the gear shift. The adrenaline from the chase was still coursing through his veins, making it impossible to relax. Victoria sat beside him, arms crossed tightly, her breathing still uneven. The gunshot from earlier still echoed in both their minds. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "Do you think we lost them?" Lucas exhaled sharply, scanning the empty road ahead. "For now." He didn't say what they were both thinking. Richard wouldn't stop. That SUV had been just the first attempt, and now they had crossed a line. Gunfire. That changed things. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was a hunt. Lucas's grip on the wheel tightened. He needed to get them off the grid. Fast. He glanced at Victoria. She was staring out the window, her expression unreadable, but her fingers, curled into tight fists in her lap, betrayed her. Lucas cleared his throat. "There's a motel about. An hour from here, nothing fancy, just a place to lay low." Victoria hesitated. "Are we safe there?" Lucas let out a dry chuckle. "Safe? No. Safer than driving around waiting to get shot at?" "Yeah," Victoria nodded. She trusted him. That realization sent a strange warmth through his chest, but he didn't have time to think about that now. They needed a plan. They needed time. They needed somewhere Richard's men wouldn't look. Lucas pressed the gas pedal harder. The place was exactly what Lucas had promised. Run down, isolated, and barely standing. The neon vacancy sign flickered against the dark sky, casting an eerie glow over the cracked parking lot. There were only 2 cars parked outside. Good. That meant fewer people, fewer questions. Lucas pulled in, shutting off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. He turned to Victoria. "Stay in the car." She opened her mouth to argue, but Lucas cut her off. "If they've got people watching the roads, we can't take chances." Victoria hesitated, then nodded. Lucas stepped out, every muscle in his body tense. He scanned the area. No signs of movement, no suspicious cars lurking in the distance. Still, his gut told him to stay sharp. He walked inside, approaching the front desk where a bored-looking clerk was half watching a tiny TV. "Need a room," Lucas said, keeping his voice calm, neutral. "Cash." The clerk barely looked at him as he grabbed a key off the rack. $50. Lucas handed over the money and took the key. Room 6. As he turned back toward the door, something in the reflection of the motel's dusty window made him stop. A black car. Parked down the street, headlights off. Lucas's heartbeat kicked into high gear. He forced himself to walk back to the car casually, naturally, but inside his mind was racing. He opened the driver's side door. "Get out, now!" Victoria didn't hesitate. She grabbed the bag from the back seat and followed him toward the room. Lucas didn't look back. If someone was watching, he wasn't going to let them know he had spotted them. They reached room 6. Lucas unlocked the door quickly and ushered Victoria inside. Only when the door was shut and locked did he finally let out a breath. Victoria turned to him. "What?" Lucas rubbed a hand over his face. "We're being watched." Victoria paled. The room was small, a single bed, a rickety nightstand, and a bathroom with a flickering light. Lucas pulled the curtains closed and checked the window. The car was still there, waiting. Victoria sank onto the edge of the bed, her face tight with worry. "We can't stay here." Lucas nodded. She was right. If they stayed, Richard's people would move in before sunrise. They needed an escape, a real one. Lucas sat down on the armrest of the chair across from her, thinking fast. "We need new wheels." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Didn't exactly bring a spare getaway car?" Lucas smirked. "No, but I know where to get one." Victoria folded her arms. "I'm not going to like this, am I?" Lucas didn't answer, because he already knew what he had to do, and it was a bad idea. Lucas grabbed the motel phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. "Who the hell is this?" Lucas exhaled. "It's me." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. Well, thought you were dead." "Not yet," Lucas muttered. "I need a favor." The voice on the other end hummed. "How illegal?" Lucas met Victoria's gaze. "Very." Another pause, then, "Meet me in 2 hours." The line went dead. Victoria frowned. "Who was that?" Lucas grabbed his jacket. "Someone who owes me." Victoria narrowed her eyes. "For what?" Lucas smirked. "For not ratting him out when I had the chance." She blinked. "And now, you're calling in the favor." Lucas nodded. Victoria studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "You know, for a guy who runs an honest business, you have a lot of sketchy connections." Lucas chuckled. "Occupational hazard." She shook her head but didn't argue. Lucas grabbed the keys and turned toward the door. "Let's go." Victoria hesitated. "And what happens if this goes wrong?" Lucas glanced at her. "Then we stop running." Victoria frowned. "What do you mean?" Lucas's expression hardened. "I mean we fight back." Victoria stared at him. Then slowly she nodded. They had spent the last 2 days on the defensive, but Lucas was done playing defense. Now, it was time to hit back. The road stretched ahead, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the darkness. Lucas kept the Charger at a steady pace, his hands firm on the wheel, his mind running through a dozen different scenarios. 2 hours. That was the time he had to meet. His contact, the one person who might be able to get them off the grid. It wasn't a great plan, but it was the only one they had. Victoria sat beside him, arms crossed, her gaze fixed out the window. She had barely spoken since they left the motel, but he knew she was thinking the same thing he was. They were running, out of options, running out of time. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "This guy we're meeting, can we trust him?" Lucas smirked, but there was no humor in it. "Define trust." Victoria gave him a pointed look. "Lucas," he sighed. "His name's Carter. We worked together years ago." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Worked together?" Lucas shrugged. "Let's just say back when I was younger and dumber, I made a few unconventional business choices." Victoria exhaled. "So he's a criminal." Lucas hesitated. Not exactly. He's just resourceful. Victoria didn't look convinced. And what exactly are we asking him for? Lucas glanced at her. A car, one that's clean, one Richard's people won't be looking for. Victoria tilted her head. And what's it gonna cost us? Lucas's jaw tightened. That was the real question, wasn't it? Nothing was ever free. They pulled into an abandoned lot behind an old warehouse, the place reeking of oil and secrecy. A few rusted-out cars were scattered across the lot, their insides gutted, their exteriors marked with graffiti. Lucas put the Charger in park and cut the engine. "Stay here," he said. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Not happening." Lucas sighed, but he didn't argue. She wasn't the type to sit on the sidelines. They stepped out of the car. The cold air pressed against them, thick with the scent of rain on pavement. A single light flickered from a warehouse. Entrance, and then the sound of footsteps. A man emerged from the shadows. Carter. He was built like a boxer. Broad shoulders, thick arms, and a face that looked like it had seen its fair share of fights. His beard was short, peppered with grey, and his eyes were sharp as he took them in. "Ford." His voice was low, smooth. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again." Lucas smirked. "Guess I like to keep people on their toes." Carter's gaze flicked to Victoria, assessing her in an instant. "This the reason you need a ride?" Victoria lifted her chin. "I can speak for myself." Carter let out a short chuckle. "I like her." Lucas crossed his arms. "You got something. For us or not?" Carter tilted his head, then gestured for them to follow. Inside the warehouse, under dim overhead lights, sat a black SUV. Lucas frowned. "Seriously? That's what you got?" Carter smirked. "You wanted something clean, untraceable. This baby's got new plates, wiped VIN, no GPS. You'll be ghosts." Victoria circled the SUV, checking it over. "And what's the catch?" Carter turned back to Lucas. "You owe me." Lucas's stomach clenched. "Of course. How much?" Carter grinned. "Not money." He stepped closer. "I need something. Udun, a guy I've been looking for. You find him, you call me." Lucas hesitated. This wasn't part of the plan, but what choice did he have? Finally he nodded. "Fine," Carter smirked. "Knew you'd see it my way." He tossed Lucas the keys. Lucas caught them mid-air. This conversation never happened. Carter winked. "What conversation?" They drove in silence for a while. Victoria finally spoke. "What did he mean, you owe him?" Lucas's grip tightened on the wheel. "Nothing we need to worry about right now." Victoria studied him. "And later?" Lucas exhaled. "We'll deal with it when we have to." Victoria frowned but didn't push. Instead, she turned her gaze forward. "So where do we go now?" Lucas's jaw tightened. They had a car. They were off the radar, but they needed a plan, and fast, because Richard wasn't done with them yet. The black SUV hummed beneath them as they cut through the empty highway, miles of darkness and silence stretching ahead. Lucas kept one hand steady on the wheel, but his mind was anything but calm. They had a clean car. They were off the radar. But it wouldn't last. Victoria sat beside him, arms folded, her expression tight with thought. She knew it too. "We can't keep running." Lucas exhaled, nodding. "I know." "Richard won't stop," she continued. "No matter where we go, no matter how far, he'll always have eyes on us." Lucas's jaw tightened. "Then we end this." Victoria turned to him, eyes sharp. "How?" Lucas kept his gaze on the road. "We take the fight to him." A beat of silence. Then Victoria let out a slow, steady breath. "Okay." They pulled off the highway into an abandoned lot near an old industrial site, a place Lucas knew would be empty, quiet, and perfect for what they needed. Lucas turned off the engine and reached for his phone. He still had Richard's number. Victoria watched him carefully. "What are you doing?" Lucas smirked. "Making a call." Victoria's brow furrowed. "Lucas, wait!" But it was too late. The line rang once, twice, then, I was wondering when you'd call. Richard's smooth voice came through. Lucas leaned back against the seat. You want her? A pause. Then, where? Lucas gave him the address. Then he hung up. Victoria stared at him. Are you insane? Lucas smirked. A little, but it's the only way to end this. She let out a breath. And if he brings more men. Lucas reached under the seat, pulling out a .45 pistol. Victoria's eyes widened slightly. Of course you have a gun, Lucas shrugged. Occupational hazard. She exhaled, then nodded. Let's do this. 30 minutes passed. Then headlights appeared in the distance. Lucas and Victoria stood near the SUV, waiting as a sleek black Mercedes rolled up. The doors opened. Richard stepped out, and he wasn't alone. 3 other men followed, tall, broad-armed. Lucas smirked. Brought friends, huh? Richard straightened his cufflinks. Didn't want any surprises? Victoria stepped forward. It ends tonight. Richard chuckled. Oh, it does. Then he nodded. His men reached for their guns. Lucas moved first. 1 shot, then another. Chaos erupted. Gunfire split the air. Lucas took cover, firing off calculated shots. Victoria stayed low, grabbing a metal pipe from the ground. One of Richard's men rushed her. She swung. Hard. The man crumpled. Lucas took down another, the weight of the pistol familiar in his hands. Richard watched it all unfold, his expression unreadable. Then he ran. Victoria saw it. No! She took off after him. Lucas cursed, following. Richard sprinted toward his car, but Victoria was faster. She caught him, grabbed his collar, spun him around. Richard laughed. You won't do it! Victoria's fists clenched. Lucas raised his. A gun! She doesn't have to. Richard's smirk faded. Sirens wailed in the distance. Victoria's eyes locked onto Richard's. It's over. Richard glanced around. His men were down. His car was blocked. Lucas stepped closer. You're done. Richard's jaw tightened. Then he dropped to his knees. The sirens grew louder, and just like that, it was over. The police arrived within minutes. Richard was taken away. His empire, his influence, gone. Victoria watched in silence. Lucas stepped beside her. You all right? She exhaled. Yeah. For the first time in weeks, she was free. Lucas smirked. So, what now? Victoria smiled. We rebuild. And just like that, a new chapter began. The morning sun broke through the horizon, casting golden light over the empty highway. The storm had passed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the road ahead was clear. Lucas drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gearshift. Beside him, Victoria sat with the windows slightly down, letting the crisp morning air wash over her. She looked different now, not just because the bruises of exhaustion had faded from her face, but because for the first time she wasn't running, she was free. It had been 3 days since Richard's arrest. The police had swarmed the scene that night, taking Richard and his men into custody. Turns out, Victoria's disappearance had drawn enough media attention that law enforcement had finally started looking into his financial dealings. With the right evidence, the very same files Victoria had been gathering before she fled, Richard was done for. The board at Langford Industries had distanced themselves from him immediately. They had no choice. And Victoria, she had won. But now, with nowhere left to run and no battles left to fight, she had one question she couldn't quite answer. What now? Lucas finally pulled the SUV off the highway, steering it down a quiet, winding road lined with oak trees. Victoria glanced at him, confused. Where are we going? Lucas smirked. You'll see. A few minutes later, they arrived at a small house nestled on the edge of a lake. The place was simple. Wooden porch, stone chimney, a beat-up truck parked outside. Smoke curled lazily. From the chimney, signaling someone was home. Victoria frowned. Where are we? Lucas cut the engine. My uncle's cabin. Victoria blinked. Wait, the one you wanted to hide out in? Lucas nodded. Yeah, figured we'd actually use it now that we're not running for our lives. Victoria exhaled, shaking her head. I still can't believe it's over. Lucas turned to her, his expression soft. It is. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe it. The next few days were strange, but peaceful. Victoria had spent so long fighting for survival, always looking over her shoulder, that waking up in a place where she didn't have to run or hide felt unnatural. But she was learning Lucas had given her space. He had never pushed, never asked what she planned to do next. And yet somehow she knew he'd be there if she needed him. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the lake, Victoria sat on the porch, watching the water ripple. Lucas stepped out, handing her a cup of coffee. She took it with a small smile. Thanks, he leaned against the railing. So, what's next for you? Victoria let out a slow breath. That was the question, wasn't it? She had spent her whole life trapped in a world she never chose, a world of board meetings, corporate power struggles, and people who saw her as nothing more than a last name with a bank account attached. Now, she had a choice. She looked at Lucas. I don't know. Lucas smirked. That's the first honest answer you've given me. Victoria laughed softly, shaking her head. You're impossible. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of not having a plan. She wasn't afraid of starting over. A few days later, Victoria stood by the truck, arms crossed as Lucas loaded up supplies. You leaving? She asked casually. Lucas glanced at her. Not permanently, just heading back to town. I figure I should check on the garage. Victoria nodded slowly. She had been thinking about this moment. The moment where Lucas went back to his life, and she had to decide what to do with hers. Lucas threw his bag into the truck bed, then turned to her. Come with me. Victoria blinked. What? Lucas shrugged. You need a fresh start. I could use an extra pair of hands at the shop. She raised an eyebrow. You're offering me a job? Lucas smirked. Not really. Just giving you a reason to stick around. Victoria studied him, searching his face for an ulterior motive, but there was none. He was just Lucas, simple, honest, genuine, and that was exactly what she needed. Finally, she exhaled. All right, Lucas grinned. Yeah? Victoria smiled. Yeah. And just like that, for the first time in her life, she made a decision just for herself, not because it was expected, not because it was the right business move, but because she wanted to. A month later, Victoria Langford was no longer a billionaire heiress. She was just Victoria, the woman who worked at a small-town garage, learned how to fix engines and drank bad coffee with a guy who had saved her life. Some might have called it a downgrade, but for the first time in a long time, she was happy. Lucas leaned against the workbench one afternoon, watching her struggle to loosen a rusted bolt on a truck. She wiped the sweat from her forehead, glaring at him. You gonna help or just stand there smirking? Lucas chuckled. You're doing fine, princess. She rolled her eyes but smiled anyway, because she wasn't a princess anymore. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Wow, what a journey. From a simple act of kindness to a fight for survival, Lucas and Victoria's story was filled with twists, tension, and a whole lot of heart. But now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far this story has traveled. And if you enjoyed this video, if you got hooked by the suspense, or if you found yourself rooting for Lucas and Victoria, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Subscribe now so you don't miss more thrilling stories like this one. Your support means the world and keeps these stories coming. And finally, thank you. Seriously, thank you for spending your time here, for watching, for being part of this.